Hello, my name's Jackie Carter. I'm the EDI Disability Academic Lead at the University of Manchester, and I've set up a series of in-conversation pieces called Let's Talk Disability. The reason for this is that I want people who have a disability and who work and study at the University of Manchester to have opportunity to share what their lived experience, their everyday experience is with somebody in a position of influence, a senior leader at the university. So each episode will feature 2 guests, and each of those guests will have a conversation about what it means to have a disability at the University of Manchester. And at the end of the conversation, each will commit to one action, we're calling them one things, where they will take away something from the conversation that they've had and do something with it. I hope you enjoy listening, and we'll make, of course, the transcripts available for everybody. Thank you. So let's make a start. So we're here. I'm here in the lovely recording studio with my 2 guests who I'm going to ask to introduce themselves today. And we're here for episode 6 of the Let's Talk Disability series. And just to say, I have started describing myself after a talk I heard last week at the University of Manchester as deaf, dizzy and disabled, and I'm wearing, like you're wearing, Beth, my green and yellow sunflower lanyard today. And I decided to do that because I think there's lack of understanding about invisible disabilities, so I've started to use that sort of catchy phrase to let people know that, you know, just because they see me doesn't mean that they understand what I'm experiencing. So these conversations, as you both know, are all about talking about the lived experience of disability, as you choose to describe it, for our staff and students at the University of Manchester. So I'm going to start, please, by handing over to you, Beth, to say hi to the listeners and say what your role is and who you are and why you're here.
Okay, thanks, Jackie. And it's amazing to be invited to be part of this amazing series. So my name is Beth Micakovic, and I am the Director of Faculty Operations here at, within the Faculty of Biology, Medicine and Health at Manchester. Jackie and I have worked together on a number of projects and initiatives which have largely been in the EDI space, and in particular more recently thinking about how we make sure that we embed EDI principles and our approaches in our approach to estates. And that's really one of the reasons why I'm really, really so pleased that I'll be getting the opportunity to talk to Jon today. But I've also opened up to Jackie previously about my own, what I call my own invisible disability, which I am a cancer survivor. I have had breast cancer in the past, but I also have anxiety, and I live daily with anxiety. And there are the 2 main aspects which I think today it would be really good to unpack.
Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing that. And Jon, over to you. If you can also do the same, introduce yourself to
I'm Jon Ashley. I'm an Assistant Director of Estates and Head of Estate Support. And obviously, you know, when we're talking about the estate, we're talking about how people use it and, you know, how they access it and how easy and what difference that might make to their life. I mean, in terms of my responsibility, I manage people. So I've got about 150 staff of my own. So I need to look after them and look after their interests. We've got a community within estates of 1,100 people. Then obviously we've got the wider community on the whole estate of staff and students. So what we do within estates, you know, it has an impact, whether passive or proactive. And I think, you know, one of the things, my approach and, you know, one of the things that I've learned is do the research, listen, and, you know, find out more about things that you might not necessarily know about, so you can make a difference and change the way that you do your work. So, you know, that's one reason I'm here today.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Jon. And again, I just want to sort of, you know, say on this recording, what a huge advocate you are and how willing you are to listen. And you are a member of many of the groups, the inclusion groups and accessibility groups. So we really appreciate, you know, you not just having an interest in this area, but to go from having an interest to enacting that. And again, that's what these recordings are about. It's about moving to action. So over to you, I think, Beth. I mean, the conversation is between you and Jon predominantly, and I'll just sort of chip in as and when I hear something that I'd like to extract a little bit more on.
Okay. Would you like me to recount my own experience?
That would be a great place to start. Yes, please.
So I was diagnosed with breast cancer at the age of 31, 19 days actually before my daughter turned 1. So she was still a young baby, and obviously I was it wasn't long after I'd had her. And although the experience in and of itself wasn't surprising because of my family history, to have had it that young at that time did come as something of a shock. But it has been, and it was an incredible journey in many respects. I have learned an awful lot fundamentally about myself through going through that process, and the challenges. And one of the things that I'd say to people when I talk about the experience is that it teaches you an awful lot around your level of own self-resilience. And it's that actually which has enabled me to carry that through into my professional career, and understanding the dynamic around what's happened with that illness and how it's fed both my ambition, it's fed my impatience, but it's also fed my sense of resilience within my working life and my day-to-day life has been really, really important. And in particular, when you're living at the same time with anxiety as I have done, it's been my friend for as long as I can remember. But it has also been a positive experience in that aspect as well. So there are, as I said, there have been a number of challenges, and I think having it at such an early age at that point, it wasn't really ever discussed. The degree to which women at that age were getting breast cancer. I think it's become more prevalent now. Actually, I mean, there have been a number of celebrity cases which I think have made it more profile. I think at the time when I was diagnosed, it was mainly Kylie Minogue. But again, so the process of going through that and living through that, and your journey and your personalised journey through it, wasn't really discussed in any great detail. And so what I encountered was to some degree a lack of understanding or a lack of knowledge about how to support younger women going through cancer, younger women who are parents going through cancer, and also thinking about the consequences of some of the obviously some of the therapy that you go through as well, and how that can have a unique impact on younger women too. So there's a lot that I have come out of reflecting of that experience about how, as a workplace as well, that we are very much a component of that therapeutic space for women and anyone really who goes through the cancer space, particularly as I was, where I was determined to work through my cancer therapy. I took time off when I had my surgery. It was very, very important to me personally, professionally. I was at the start of my career, but as a parent, to make sure that I had that normality, that I had that consistency, and I still had that drive to continue and to succeed and have that quality of life. And that has sustained me. But that also means that there is something around needing to support employers to know how to support people who are going through that as well. But certainly I think in the constellation of thinking about quality of life and thinking about therapy, that's a really, really key component.
Thank you, Beth. That resonates so deeply with me. Also, if I may share, as a breast cancer survivor, but not as young as you were when I had it. You mentioned the environment, the work environment. And Jon, I wondered if you wanted to say anything. And perhaps before you do, I just want to make it clear, because I've come across colleagues who have also had cancer, who haven't known that having cancer means that they're categorized as disabled from a legal point of view. I don't know if you found that was that the case with you? Did you know that?
I did know that it was classed as a disability, but I will be honest and say that there is for me a level of imposter syndrome around it, because it's not visible, and I now wear my lanyard, but it isn't evident that the experience that you're going through is not something that is necessarily physically manifest. Obviously it is when you're going through the experience. I lost my hair, I looked unwell, I was, you take a number of medications which change your appearance quite drastically. But you're on an escalator in cancer treatment that actually is over and done with relatively quickly. And there's a transition point into what is termed, I suppose, recovery, But I think that there is an ambiguity around that, because I felt that it's only in that path when I think, talking to others who've been in that experience too, it's only at that point that you actually reflect, oh my goodness, what have I been through? And you start to process that. And there is a level of support that is absolutely fundamental and needed in the aftermath of that diagnosis and having the treatment, which again, thinking about us as employers, just being alert to how do we support our colleagues who are going through that. And I think talking through the various experiences that people have is really critical to gaining that institutional understanding around it as well.
Thank you so much, Beth. And may I ask, before I pass back to Jon, did you have post-cancer fatigue? Because I certainly did. The treatment.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Post-cancer fatigue, brain fog was quite severe. Anxiety, my anxiety peaked quite substantially during that time. But yes, I would say fatigue is something that was quite long-standing afterwards, yes.
Well, I was going to say, Beth, thanks very much for sharing that. That's a challenging but amazing journey you've been on there. It does resonate from some of my own experiences with family. It was interesting, really, because preparing for this session, there's a whole gamut, this whole spectrum of things to consider around disability, and in there is obviously a hidden disability, and it might not be categorised anywhere or by anybody. And I think they're some of the really important things that we do need to pick up. We talk about intersectionality, we talk about people who may even have a temporary debilitation and how we can make the estate better and more comfortable for people. So it's not just about handrails, it's not just about ramps, it's not just about a teaching experience, it's about the whole environment. And one of the colleagues in EDI put it the best way, really, that their home life is set up around their accessibility and their experience. But when they come to work, is there a barrier there immediately that prevents them from living the life that they want to live or, they expect to live? So, when we look at the estate, it's not just about those hard things, it's about provision. It could be about spaces for people, what's the environment like in your office? What's it like in communal areas? What does the estate look like? Is it depressing? Is it enlivening? Can you relax? Can you change places? Can you go to different scenarios on campus that might help you, particularly if you want some headspace? I think that's quite important, really. You can imagine on an ordinary day, a lot of people are already fatigued by the time they get to work anyway, particularly if they come on public transport or they've driven here. So I think, there's that wider perspective, and there's quite a lot of research and learning on it. I think probably from a student perspective, but again, students share the same requirements and same challenges that staff do. So I think it's about making a campus for everyone, really. I think historically, obviously we've come on a journey as a university. We have the North Campus with UMIST. Then we've got this campus with Victoria University, some legacy buildings. So we've got very old buildings like John Owens and Samuel Alexander. And then we've got some sort of mid-50s, mid-60s properties as well. But it's how we sort of retrofit and redesign those as the campus develops. And even, I think, where we've had new builds, there's probably some learning experiences. I think particularly around conversation more than anything.
Wow.
Obviously budgets are always a demanding factor, but I think the conversation to inform how that spending takes place is probably the most important thing. And as you were saying before, Jackie, I've been involved in a number of groups, and the important thing is just to find out more, really. Understand where do we sit as a department, where are the gaps in terms of our understanding, and how do we sort of inform the university about the right strategies to take moving forward. So,
Great. That's a real opener, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I'm going to back this one back to you, Beth, because, we have you sitting here representing one of the three faculties. We have Jon representing the estates and all the complexity of dealing with limited resources and also prioritising. How can we talk to each other, including in this conversation, to really get a better handle on what needs to happen to meet the needs of those staff with disabilities, including those with invisible disabilities? What would you say next?
I mean, I think, first of all, I think one of the things which I think we are facing societally, but as an organisation as well, is that blurring between the digital and physical spaces that we inhabit. And I think we underestimate, in some respects, the interplay between those, particularly in terms of managing sort of neurodiverse conditions, even anxiety and mental health. You know, if you think about the level of stimulation that your digital environment provides you, and the respite that you need to seek sometimes in your physical environment. And so when we think about our estate strategy going forward, our infrastructure strategy going forward, it's really, really important to me that we bear those two things in mind simultaneously. And we're starting to learn more about that interplay is really important. In terms of how we start to think strategic across the whole organisation, it's doing exactly what you're doing, Jon. It's joining the networks. It's getting the right voices in the projects at the right time from inception. And I think one of the things that I've started to learn as well, you know, in being in this role, is seeing how projects evolve over the lifetime of that they exist. Right. So there are very few short-term projects. Many of them are you know, quite a lengthy, at least a year, sometimes a couple of years in gestation. And so you might do an EIA at the beginning of that, but as
EIA
the scope,
being?
an equality impact assessment.
Thank you.
But the scope may change throughout that time, and so the continuous dialogue with people with you know, the amazing colleagues that we have on the networks, I think is really critical as part of that project development as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I think it's not just about design and conversation. I think we need to experiment a bit more as well. You know, so when it came to teaching spaces, we had a no traditional model, you know, classroom style. So we just mixed it up a little bit and put flexible furniture in and stuff like that. So I'm not saying that's the answer, but I'm saying if you just do stuff a little bit out of the box every now and again, see how it's received, and you can be a little bit more agile. And I think you're right, you know, the digital versus, you know, being in person sort of way of working or learning, it's all changing. But again, you know, we've got this new sort of environment where people might work from home, they might prefer to come to work. Everyone's individual balance is different. You know, when we talk about disability, I think some people revert to the fact, well, people can work from home, but there's a whole sort of communal, societal sort of element to coming to work and enabling people to have the same experiences and choices that everyone else could. But yeah, so again, it is about just making sure we've got the right information and the right discussions going into something that might take several years to build, and like you say, go on that journey, and maybe agile enough in between to make some subtle changes as well.
Can I pick up then on mainstreaming what you're talking about? Because, you know, we do have pockets of excellence around the university. I've just been in conversation with a colleague in the library, and you know, the library has done some amazing things by way of making learning spaces accessible to all students, and having quiet rooms, having rooms that they can go and work single on their own or in groups in. But how do we, given the 200-year-old nature of the university campus, how do we take good practice and scale it up where it doesn't yet exist? I mean, it seems to me that's a real challenge, not just in the physical space, actually, in the digital space as well, to make, you know, digitally inclusive learning environments as well. So have you got any thoughts on broadening it out?
Well, I was just going to say there is a digital learning and digital equity group that are looking at a strategic approach to accessibility, particularly around teaching. But again, you know, that needs to be balanced with staff experiences as well, you know, make sure staff have those same accessibility options as well. But, you know, I mean, my view is you've just got to take it on balance. I think, like Beth says, the way these things are evolving, you can sort of second guess some of it, but not all of it. But you need to be able to be flexible enough to make some changes as you go along.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to distinguish between scaling up and replicating. So I think one of the things that at Manchester that we are so fortunate to have is the scale of the estate all in one space, right? Yeah. And so there's a huge opportunity to have a diversity of spaces across our estate. And for me, that's what it means about scaling, so that our estate is open to everyone. It should be open to everyone, with a mixture of spaces that accommodate different ways of working, different preferences, and how you work at any one point, depending on what sort of work you're doing. And so it's not necessarily about saying, well, we've got a quiet pod over here, so we need a quiet pod over there as well. It's actually signposting appropriately and having that knowledge open to say, well, if you want a quiet spaces, we've got some brilliant garden area over here. We've got some wellness areas over here. Quiet pods belong here. And it really is that signposting as opposed to duplication or replication for me.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're right. Is there anything happening in your faculty that you'd like to share with us? I'm thinking about, you've had some great speakers there, and I'm thinking about the woman, I forget her name, the professor who came from University of East Anglia. Who's doing some amazing work. And how is that? Yeah, how can we learn from elsewhere is what I'm saying. It's not just about what we're doing here, it's how can we improve the offer to our disabled staff and students because of what we see elsewhere happening. That's really good.
I mean, even as a disabled member of staff, as it would be identified, that seminar for me was absolutely pivotal in transforming my understanding, particularly around physical disability. And it was one of the, as I came out of it, I met with Hamid Haroon, who is our one of our wonderful EDI champions within the faculty, and I did an estates walk around with him, and again, absolutely illuminating. The things that you do not see but then suddenly become so clear when you do the walk around is incredible. And it was one of the reasons why, as a faculty, we're moving into developing our own estate strategy and thinking about what our estate needs to look like for the future, thinking about changing pedagogy, also thinking about well-being, which is core to our strategic ambition. It's meant that we made sure that the disability networks are very much involved in the World Cafes that we had dedicated sessions for them, that there were safe psychological spaces where they can discuss their needs. And that's really key. But it can't just be, for me, it can't just be a one-off. It needs to be a sustained discussion going forward.
Yeah, I mean, you came up with a fantastic example there. I mean, there's some brilliant stuff that the EDI team do, and one of those is illuminating the experiences. So I mean, he helped put together a video, a walkthrough through a building, and obviously, the challenges that someone might experience if they were using a wheelchair, for example. And I think that's fantastic material and evidence to take into a department like ours, because people come to work and they work to a routine, and they look at the guidance that might be there, and the guidance might just cover the basics, but we need to think beyond that, and it's about having that empathy and trying to understand the experience that other people might have when they particularly use the estate, and using that to inform your design at the very beginning of a project, because trying to make amendments at the end of it is very costly and very difficult and very hard to do. And, I've had all sorts of discussions internally, as you can imagine, within the department, but, proportionality is one of them. And I think people always revert to proportionality. Well, if it's too difficult to do, then maybe that just goes on hold and prioritise something else. But then you've got to look at the context of that, how many people are impacted, how bad is the experience that someone might be going through because of that. So how do you reprioritise those particular issues and make a case for them? So, to me, that's gold. It's about communication, conversation, understanding those experiences and using it to inform. And I think to educate and convince people, I think before this meeting, I'm doing a bit of research looking at different groups or committees that have met, particularly in Parliament. They're looking at the Equality Act and saying that it's not doing the job it should do, because people aren't subscribing to the values that it encompasses, and people revert to baseline legislation. But that sort of seeks to cover all bases, but doesn't necessarily deal with the person's individual experience. So I think it's bringing that into the frame, and I think coming back, Beth, to how you started this particular conversation, around hidden disability. That's where there's more education is needed and more awareness, I think. so that people can just think about that. It's about people by default thinking about these issues. And it's not just about the estate and buildings, it's about processes, about how we do business, it's how we deliver things, how we engage.
Yeah,
you know,
it's fundamentally about how you get the best out of people. Though, you know, I think about my, you know, in particular in the context of managing anxiety day to day, but I'm also an introvert, which is not the same thing. But nevertheless, in some elements of it, the things which make me work well speak to both those characteristics, I suppose. So focus and clarity, and time to energize through actually having time on my own, because it's through that time where I can think and I can work through and I can focus and I get clarity in my thoughts. That energizes me to be able to then go into you know, a day like today, which is, okay, I know I'm on site, I'm going to absolutely make the most of seeing people,
yes.
engaging with people, and I get a lot of energy from that as well. But I also know that tomorrow I will need that day to, okay, now it's thinking through what's happened today, and it's thinking, you know, focusing really on my priorities. And I think it's, you know, it's really, as I said at the beginning, it's one of the reasons why we need to think very, very carefully about our hybrid estate, our physical and our home life, our home working environment as well. And really in terms of our own responsibilities and thinking about what energizes us. How do you get the best out of yourself? And then how do we make sure that that's conveyed through in the conversations that we have with our line managers and our teams around us, so they can understand and have a shared understanding around that working practices
I love the way this conversation is going. There's a lot of, you can't see us, but there's a lot of head shaking going on around the table.
Yeah.
I wanted to pick up on something that you've both made me think about, actually. We've talked about hidden disabilities, invisible disabilities. We've talked a little bit about your personal experience, Beth, but I'm thinking more generally, and this was prompted, I'm reviewing an academic paper, and I reviewed it over the weekend, and it was based in Norway. Okay, and it was 3 case studies from 3 different private sector organisations about how they're implementing EDI, and they were looking at the motivation of the staff according to the different schemes that they were using. And it really got me thinking about, you know, the staff motivation, but aligned with that comes well-being. So you've both really talked around, you know, a sense of belonging, a sense of good well-being, a sense of being able to be the best we can be at work. Is there anything you'd want to sort of add to what you said? Because, you know, we've coming at this from a place of talking about disability, but it's much more than that. We all have multiple identities, okay? So what is it we could be doing really, in addition to what we're already doing, to get the best out of our workforce and for people to have a good experience when they work or study at Manchester?
I think you summed it up yourself, Jackie, to be honest. It's whole picture, isn't it?
Yep.
You know, as a person, and, you know, everyone has different challenges of their own, whether that, you know, it's disability or something else. Family commitments, it could be, you know, other things going on in their life. But you want everyone to come to work, either to come here to learn or to work on an equitable basis, you know. So you, whether that's the environment, whether that's the way that they dealt with when they work or learn, the communication or the relationships that they have with individuals, the prospects that they have, career development or opportunity, it's all linked in. You know, we're talking about society and individuals. So, you know, that's just one part of it, you know, the physical element, but you've got to look at it in the whole round. And I think you've got to understand that not delivering something or failing to enable a component could lead to failure in that overall picture. I think it's just trying to have that overall vision, really.
That's a really good point. Beth, what do you think?
So as I was preparing for this, one of the things I came across was a fantastic blog by one of our own academic researchers in FBMH called Carsten Timmerman, and he's just written a blog, I think fairly recently, which is around cancer and the quality of life. And it's I might send a reference to you, Jackie, so you can reference at the end. But it was an interesting historical perspective and how quality of life really wasn't discussed much, particularly in the context of cancer prior to the 1970s. And then afterwards, you know, it started to seep more into medical discourse. But but it's also something that's starting to seep increasingly more, and we call it well-being, but essentially it's quality of life within the organisation, which is why, as I said at the beginning, it's so important that we see our working place as an extension of that sense of being well, just well, and feeling well. And if you feel well, if you feel energized, if you feel engaged, if you have that seamlessness, that's where you can really meet your potential, in my view. And if you're going through something which is as sometimes as traumatic as going through a very serious illness or something like that, it means that you know that you have that support wrapped around you, and it's that confidence interval, isn't it, around knowing that you have an organisation that you work for, which will wrap its arms around you in a sense.
Oh, that's a lovely way.
Yeah.
That's a really lovely metaphor as well. So I'm going to wrap up soon, but before I do, I'm just thinking about, practical suggestions for perhaps those people who don't have, they don't feel they have agency, perhaps, in the positions that they're in, or they don't feel they have a voice, but we'd want to hear their voice, right? So what is it we could do in this space to enable people to have a voice, to say more about what is possibly impacting, to take your point, what is not going well and how can we overcome that? Do you have any thoughts, again, about disability specifically, but in the larger picture?
I've got a particular view. I think you both touched on it really, and that's about support that you get from your managers and your colleagues, really. I think by and large, everyone's happy to listen, happy to receive an experience, happy to receive information. But what I do see time and time again is that someone who has a challenge, they've not had their voice supported, they've been left on their own. And I think it's such an important thing to do, is that you can just lend an ear, or you can just volunteer to be available. You can leave it to the individual to determine how they want to engage, but at least let them know that they can if they want to, about a particular problem. And when something precipitates physically, we've got someone who's got an accessibility issue, in most cases it's down to the fact that no one said anything. That person's turned up and is facing an experience that could have been avoided. So it could be as simple as having a conversation with someone before they start working here, making sure that the conversation, if you were aware or someone's volunteered information about themselves, that they feel free to talk about it. But then see whether you've got agency in that to talk to other people. So, is there an issue around the accommodation? Is there an issue around accessibility? Shout out and say it. No one's going to be upset about that. But the more information that we have, the more that we can do with it. And, that's just one thing that I just get a bit frustrated about. Please speak up and please, talk about it when you feel able to do that and share it.
Thanks, Jon. Beth, what do you think?
So I think we already have an amazing infrastructure through our networks, which I know I keep shouting about, but they are fantastic. And it is one of the ways which I think they are very, very powerful in getting that voice heard. And I certainly, in terms of my professional role, have learned an enormous amount in my interactions with them and with the EDI team as well. I know it sounds really daft, but actually I've recently, after our discussion with you, Jackie, started wearing my lanyard, and it's amazing how actually this is a wonderful code in a way. It has stimulated conversations because I'm meeting other people who are wearing the lanyards as well, and you start to build a community of understanding just even simply in that way. The power of a lanyard is incredible. The other thing that I would also say, and I would just like to make a plug for, is it's really important that if you are disabled, and whether that is you've always had the disability or you acquire it through circumstances I have done, that you declare it, and that you make sure that you register that from a data perspective that you have it, because as an organisation we need to know about both the number of disabled colleagues that we have within the organisation, disabled students, so that we can actually make sure that we have all the provisions and the planning in place. to be able to accommodate them and to make sure that that voice is included as we do any part of our strategy design, any part of our operational implementation. That is so important. If we don't know, it can be quite challenging to act. So if I make a plea at all, it's please do not be afraid to disclose. I do know how sometimes actually it takes a big inhalation of breath to tick that box. I know that. But I also know that from a long-term perspective, it makes a world of difference.
Thank you very much for saying that almost on my behalf, but also to say that anything that's shared is shared in confidence. So it's really important. And we do have an anticipatory duty to ensure that we, put into place an environment that people feel safe, secure, and can have equal opportunity in. So I'm going to hand over to both of you to ask the final question. As I said at the beginning, this is all about having good, open, honest conversations, to which I'm really grateful. Thank you both. But also to move from having discussions to action. So, Beth, I'm going to ask you to start by asking Jon your one thing, please.
It seems so unfair because Jon is already doing so much. But, Jon, if there's one thing that you would commit to as a result of this conversation, what do you think it would be?
One thing. I was going to close the conversation from my end, really, just by saying, I think you just demonstrated, Beth, you don't know who's in the room and what their experiences are, and you think about the most obvious things, but then there's lots of other stuff that comes out. And I think one thing that I'm determined to do is, whilst I do get involved as best as that I can, is to just try and get other people involved. People really struggle with their own headspace, with the time, and fitting in a little bit of free thinking around some of these more complex issues is a little bit more difficult. But there's certainly more we can do, I think, around training. And I don't just mean, out the box training. It's like in the context training.
Yeah.
So when you're designing something or when you're having a conversation with someone, here are the things that you need to preload in your head before you start that conversation. And these are the kind of things that you need to take away. So I think we need to start getting our fingers into the dough a little bit more now. There's lots of information out there.
Yes.
But I think we now need to start driving it a little bit harder.
I love the fingers into the dough.
Yeah.
That's lovely. Jon's fingers were massage of the dough there.
Oh, no.
Brilliant. And you're right about bringing other people in. Okay, we can't do it all by ourselves. It is a collective effort, isn't it? So thank you. Inclusive by design. That's a strap line, right? Jon, your turn to ask Beth.
I had loads of different things to ask you. But I think, because you started fresh at the university, didn't you?
Yes.
So I think my main question was around, was it what you expected, good or bad? And what do you think the most obvious gaps were, particularly around the estate?
Is it what I expected? I don't think whenever you join Manchester, people always talk about, when I said I was going to the university, it's so big, it's fantastic. You do not realise how big this place is and the scale of this place is until you get here. And I've said that many times before, probably to ad nauseum, but it's absolutely true. So I tried not to have actually any expectations, but just to embrace it was different. It's different, and to try to learn almost anew and afresh. In terms of gaps. To be honest, the biggest, probably the biggest gaps that I've seen has been in my walk around when I did the walk around with Hamid, and it's seeing things that are so obvious now to me, but when you walk around you just don't see. So things like card readers are too high, things like that. You have to go around a back exit to get to a ramp into a building, which doesn't build a sense of community. It's a separate entrance, a separate exit. It's some of those things which are so commonsensical in a way, but yet we overlook. And so if there's anything that I would say is just open our eyes. I think organisationally, let's just open our eyes and commit to that. And I include myself in that as well. We're all learning. I continue to learn every day around this, and whether that is talking to neurodiverse colleagues and thinking about their experiences in, in the digital and the physical interface, and as well as our physical disabled students and staff as well.
So your request would be to open your eyes, be more alert, think about inclusivity in everything you do.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you, Beth. This conversation doesn't need to end, Jon.
No,
I know you had more questions you would like to have asked, but the conversation carries on, and it carries on with us. It carries on with us talking to other people. So that's really what this is about. It's about catalysing change and making sure that we're all in this together. So thank you both so much from the bottom of my heart to both of you for coming today. It's been a really interesting conversation. I had no idea how it was going to unfold, but I really appreciated you both being here. So thank you.
No, thanks.
Thank you.